the peak was 85, 86. We released an album called Come Out and Play. We made a couple of strategic errors. We released the wrong single, Leader of the Pack, which was really the biggest mistake. That was mistake one. Mistake two was my singer decided to go to Congress to defend Twisted Sister's attacks by Tipper Gore, that we were destroying morality of America. Rather than keep his mouth shut, he wanted to go to Congress and tell them that we're all straight. He's honest with his wife. He's like a one-man woman. He's a family man. And nothing is worse in our reputation than that. That just destroys everything.
Hi, friends. Welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. That was JJ French. JJ is co-author of a book titled Twisted Business. However, if you're a rock and roll fan, then you might more readily recognize JJ as the founder and lead guitarist of the iconic rock band Twisted Sister. So JJ joins me today with his co-author, best-selling business author, Steve Farber. And so we have a really entertaining conversation about the business lessons that JJ learned during a career that was alternately dotted with amazing success, crushing disappointment, and bouncing back, and then even more success. We dig into the 7 principles embodied in the TWISTED acronym in the title: tenacity, wisdom, inspiration, stability, trust, excellence, and discipline. And I love this quote from JJ in the book. Quote, "Wisdom comes from your ability to study everything you need to know about the business you're in, but it's not just what you know, it's what you don't know too. Never stop asking questions, always remain curious." So we get into all of this and much, much more in this really fun conversation. But before we get to Jay and Steve, I want to remind you to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And if you subscribe, well, we'd certainly appreciate if you'd leave us a review and give us your feedback about how we're doing. So thank you. All right, let's jump into it.
JJ French, Steve Farber, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Pleasure to have you. So, this is, after 1,020 plus episodes, this is the first time I've had a bona fide rock star on my show. So, JJ, welcome.
That's not true. I've been on before.
No, you're a rock star of a different dimension.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Over 1,000 shows? Seriously?
Yeah, 1,000,
wow.
20, 21, something like that. So
how many years has this been going on?
6 years.
Wow, very impressive.
So yeah, we're just we're going to continue the string for at least another year. So
awesome.
Yeah, it's exciting. It's fun. I get a chance to meet really interesting, smart people like yourself. So let's start with JJ, Steve, if you don't mind. Sure. JJ, for people that aren't big rock fans like me, maybe they don't recognize your name. Tell us who you are and what you've done and what you do now.
Well, my name is JJ French, John French, but JJ professionally. I founded the band Twisted Sister 49 years ago. Next year's our 50th anniversary. The band, most people would probably know the band's name. What would be an interesting thing most people don't realize, I can read off statistics like the band's 50 years old, the band's played, I've done 9,000 performances, the band sold 20 million records, 37 gold and platinum albums, toured 40 countries around the world, blah, blah, blah.
That's interesting
thing, sorry?
That's all?
Yeah, well, that's all we could fit in last week.
All right.
But I think the most impressive, actually, I was thinking about this the other day. The class of 73, in terms of rock bands, Judas Priest, Aerosmith, AC/DC, Kiss, Twisted Sister. That's a hell of a class of 73.
That is,
And there were many other bands, but these are the bands, 5 of us, who everybody knows who these bands are. And I think if you said to us in 1973, how long would your band last? The answer would have been 5 years, because that was pretty much the standard answer that we would give, because nobody could possibly foresee how
Make
things
a career
went.
of rock and roll. Yep.
And in respect to my fellow monster artists, Aerosmith, Judas Priest, Kiss, AC/DC, these 4 particular acts have probably sold more records than us. I'll freely admit that. Okay. I mean, we sold 20 million, but I think Kiss is probably at 100 million, and maybe Priest is at 40 million, and Aerosmith is probably about 80 or 90 million, and so on and so forth. So, okay, I'll give them that. However, if you ask a 10-year-old kid today, sing me a Kiss song, he won't know one. If you ask him to sing me an Aerosmith song, he won't know one. If you ask him to sing me a Judas Priest song or an AC/DC song, he won't know one. But if you sing, we're not going to take it, that kid will sing, we're not going to take it.
Right.
And the key to that is that we pivoted our marketing to licensing 20 years ago.
Right.
And that's the essence of why I'm a business guy, the essence of really the interest with Steve Farber is that I approached Twisted Sister as a business, not as necessarily as a rock band, which incidentally, when I started, it was just a rock band and I was just a guitar player. But over the years, many things changed. And as the marketplace changed, we became aware that this song, we're not going to take it, and I Want to Rock, were just unique songs, unique anthems. So, for example, many people know We Are the Champions, We Will Rock You, because they're played in every stadium around the world. Everybody knows those two songs. Those two songs may be the most famous rock anthems of the 70s. I won't argue that. We're Not Going to Take It, I Want to Rock are the most popular rock anthems of the 80s, and we have managed to take them, turn them into a licensing juggernaut, and they're in more TV shows, commercials, advertisements than any other songs, which is why people know them and why they should possibly care about why I'm in the business and wrote a book with Steve.
So a question I have is, so did your videos for those two songs, does Mark Metcalf pay you like a royalty for extending his career beyond Animal House?
It's funny you should mention that because Mark Metcalf and I, we do celebrity autograph sessions. We've done it in the past. And I said, last time I was with Mark, I said, tell me, is every single day does somebody walk up to you and he goes, every single day of my life since April or May of 1984, somebody walks up to me and says, what do you want to do with your life? So listen, there's worse things in this world, Oh, yeah. There's worse things in this world than to not be known for something. I'm sorry. People bitch and moan, oh, woe is me. I'm stuck in whatever. Guess what? I'd rather be stuck in whatever than not stuck at all. I mean, hey, there's a country song in that, isn't there?
Yeah,
Steve?
yeah. Well,
I'd rather be stuck in whatever than not stuck at all. I like that idea.
Well, for people who don't recognize the actor, he played Niedermeyer on Animal House. So for those of us a certain generation, we remember Niedermeyer first.
And it was, and by the way, my singer was a stroke of genius that Dee wanted him in. I mean, Dee was, we loved Animal House. When we did the video, we had the opportunity, it was unique. Most people do not know this, but here's a really good video tidbit fact. In 1984, the owners of MTV were American Express and Warner Music.
Well, I read that in your book, and I was like, I had no idea American Express.
Yeah, and by the way, I've been challenged on that by a bunch of professionals, and they look it up and they go, oh my God, you're right. So I'm telling you, this is the case. So because our label was a Warner Music label, the record company president, when he bragged to me that he could get the video on, he says, do you know who owns MTV? I thought it was just a bunch of hyperbolic nonsense.
Right.
One of the reasons why the video became so ubiquitous was because we were on the label that was a part owner of MTV. And finally, as Steve knows, because it's all about timing, and we missed the boat so many times in the past, we finally caught the ship. We finally caught up with the ship. And boy, did we catch up with the ship.
Yeah. So just before we get on to your book, which you've written is so I take it from the book, you guys no longer perform.
We retired in 2016.
2016, okay.
Steve and I met around 2010-ish, and Steve has been, egging me on and been my mentor, and basically I owe my speaking career to him and the idea of the book to him, because the speaking career goes hand in hand with the book. Because after you do enough speaking gigs, the question's always the same from the buyer, which is, oh, by the way, where's your book? That's like the second question that comes up. And I can finesse my way with, I don't have a book out, but I will eventually, to enough is enough is enough. And finally, after fits and starts, I use the same mentality in terms of partnering with someone like Steve that I use with the band, which is I'm strong with many things, and I'm not strong with other things. That's why I need the guys in Twisted Sister. I need a guy to write the songs and to be the resident dickhead, my singer. Everybody needs everybody needs one. I love him, but he's a lead singer. End of story.
You've got good stories in the book about your relationship with Dee. Yes.
And everybody needs one, and I love him. But the point is, I couldn't have done this book without Steve, because given my own devices, the book would never have been finished because I would have written the 19 volumes history of the Jews and heavy metal, and it just would have gone on and on and on. And when Steve, when we finally discussed it, I said, I need someone to go, shut up already, like enough already, like let's get down to the important pieces, which is why we have a 200 and some odd page book, which is easy to read, and people love it. It's very simple. So it brought me and Steve closer because we met at a social media event, which Steve can go into, and that's why the book happened finally.
All right, so Steve, tell us about meeting JJ.
First of all, let me say, if only he had the gift of gab.
Yeah, I know, right?
If there's one thing I could change,
he's so ready
about John J.J. French is his shy and retiring personality. You got to really draw him out. No, we met at a business conference in Chicago, 2010-ish, like he said, and we connected immediately on a couple of different levels. One was, I spoke at that event, and I, gave an overview of my Radical Leap framework, which is love, energy, audacity, and proof. Right. I opened it up for Q&A, and he and I had not met yet. He was pointed out to me across the room. Somebody said, "Hey, that's the Twisted Sister guy over there." And I remember thinking, "Oh, that's cool." I was never really a Twisted Sister fan, but
all right, that's it. I'm done. I'm out of here.
I loved the name. I thought it was the greatest band name ever created. So anyway, I opened it up for Q&A. He was the first person to stand up and grab the microphone, and he said something about the nefarious nature of the entertainment business.
Dysfunction in the workplace. That's how it was.
Yeah, but he prefaced it by saying, "I'm in the entertainment business, and that's the most dysfunctional business in the world. How do you deal with that?" kind of a thing. So anyway, we connected on that level, and then we sat down for breakfast the next morning, and he told me the Twisted Sister story. And within the first few minutes, I knew that this was a remarkable story. Mm-hmm. I mean, for one thing, I think this was, you kind of led with this, JJ, because I remember it as being the first thing that kind of hit me between the eyes. He said, "I discovered early on that there's no place for drugs and alcohol in the business of rock and roll." Yeah. And Twisted Sister was a completely drug and alcohol free band, and it was like, "What?" He said, "Yeah, but we couldn't tell anybody because it would ruin our image." "What?" So tell me more. And then he just went on. So we connected over that, and then it came up in conversation that I play guitar. So he took out, I'll never forget this. He took out his phone. And he started showing me pictures. First, it was a picture of his daughter, Sam. Oh, there's my daughter, one picture. And then guitar.
Well, you got to get to the important. Right. Kids are
one picture of the daughter, 100 pictures of his vintage guitar collection. And of course, it was wonderful. So what happened as a result of that first connection was, I said to him, pretty much right away, you really need to get up on stage and tell your story. You need to be a speaker, because you have a great story to tell, and you're a business guy, and there's great lessons in there. And he's one of the most naturally gifted storytellers I've ever met. And of course, as he just said, along with that is you got to have a book at some point to capture these ideas. Mm-hmm. So the speaking thing came about first. I had an event here in San Diego in 2012 called the Extreme Leadership Summit. It was the first event we ever did. So I said, "Okay, what do you think? Should we make this your speaking debut?" And it turns out it was, and he was fantastic. And then it took several more years of back and forth to get the book going. But what happened was it became pretty clear that there's a really good book in here somewhere, and that it really wasn't going to get done unless he partnered up with somebody to do it. And he tried with a couple of other people, or at least one other person. It didn't quite work. So finally we sat down and said, "Okay, let's do this together." Right. But it's got to be, it's off brand for me. I mean, it's not, it's very different from the other books that I've written, but it's a business book, and I said that needs to be a big part of the focus. But let's also tell your story.
And to Steve's credit, he had my voice perfectly in the book. So it sounds like me. It doesn't sound like I'm dictating it to somebody who's writing my story. It actually sounds like me. Like people reading it say to me, this is the greatest compliment I've gotten on the book. It sounds like you're talking to me. Like people who know me, who read the book go, John, I hear you telling me these stories. And it's one thing to tell them. It's another thing to have somebody interpret your telling them and then write it back so it sounds like
as reading it, I mean, Steve and I know each other a little bit, and I've read your books, and you've been on the show once before. But yeah, I would have thought, okay, this is JJ's voice in the book. For people, this book we're talking about is a book he's written called Twisted Business. I think, you've done, I think, a great job of compressing into a relatively short number of pages this incredible story of the arc of your career and the lessons you've learned. And in the context of, I think the part I wanted to spend more time talking about was the first T of tenacity, because you've been through so much before you started the band, after the band, great success, bankruptcy, found yourself working. I mean, this is the part that, sort of opened my jaw. Was working in a stereo store after having experienced the heights of rock stardom, and then recapturing it again.
People glossed over the fact that I managed a pool hall for a year prior to the stereo store.
Okay.
And that was even more humbling.
Wait, was that in the book? I don't recall the pool hall. Okay, I guess I didn't recall that part, but it's just like,
for a short period of time, I managed a pool hall. And the guy who owned the pool hall was a good friend of mine who and I needed money. I was broke. I had just finished the bankruptcy.
And just to put it in context, you're saying broke, finished the bankruptcy. This was after. This was after I Want to Rock and we're not going to take another
millions of dollars.
I mean, I said
this is walking out of bankruptcy court. The day I walked out of bankruptcy court, I went up to my stepmother's house. I had 2 Subway tokens and a guitar left. She handed me an American Express card with my name on it on her account, so I'd have a card. And I went down to the gym that I was working out at, and the owner of the gym had a nephew who was a singer-songwriter who I kind of poo-pooed. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden I said, hey, man, you want to work with me and manage your nephew? I need a job and I need money. And he said, if you agree to, I just bought a pool hall. And if you agree to work overnights, I'll pay you cash every week. And that was it. That was the beginning of the comeback. Paid me $400 cash a week. I managed this kid. His kid happened to be a genius singer-songwriter. We got him a record deal within 6 months, but that's how I survived. And here's the key. The guy told me that if anybody walks into the pool hall and recognizes you and says, why are you here at a pool hall at 2:00 in the morning? You can tell them you're an owner. Mm-hmm. You're my partner. That way, I own pool halls.
Well, so take us through the arc, though, of what happened from sort of the peak to the pool hall. What was the triggering event?
The peak was 85, 86. We released an album called Come Out and Play. We made a couple of strategic errors. We released the wrong single, Leader of the Pack, which was really the biggest mistake. That was mistake 1. Mistake 2 was my singer decided to go to Congress to defend Twisted Sister's attacks by Tipper Gore.
Tipper Gore, right?
That we were destroying morality of America. Rather than keep his mouth shut, he wanted to go to Congress and tell them that we're all straight.
Well, and just so people of a certain generation don't remember, is back in the 80s, at that time, Al Gore's wife, he was vice
ran
president.
The PMRC.
Right.
PMRC, Parents Music Resource Center. They decided that music, that there should be ratings on CDs and albums telling you what you're buying.
Right.
Because, kids should be forewarned. Parents should know what they're buying. And especially bands like Twisted Sister, because we are the devil incarnate. And we obviously must have devil worshiping messages in our music. Okay.
Right.
So then my singer goes to Congress and testifies that, he's totally straight. He's honest with his wife. He's like a one-man woman. He's a family man. And like nothing is worse in our reputation than that. That just destroys everything. So that was probably a mistake. That was probably big mistake number 2. We toured around the country following that, which most people don't know. There were laws passed to keep us out of various cities in the South.
Specifically
to keep Twisted Sister out of those cities, called the anti-rock laws, which stated that if you performed sex with animals, children, or dead people, or you wrote songs about performing sex with animals, children, or dead people, you couldn't play in these cities, which of course is amongst the most ridiculous things on the planet. And so that, of course, then we were arrested for obscenity. While that was going on. And ultimately, then we followed up an album that didn't do well with another album that didn't do well, and the band closed up. Unfortunately, me and Dee and the band members signed a personal services agreement with a merchandise company in which we guaranteed paying back the first $1 million advance in the history of merchandising deals. And we couldn't pay it back. And they said, we're going to sue you. And I said, are you suing everybody in the band? And they go, no, just you and Dee, because we think you guys are the only potential people who could possibly pay it back.
Yeah.
And at that point, Dee and I weren't talking to each other, but I found out through his representatives he was going to file for bankruptcy. And then I thought, well, if he does, they're going to come after me. So I'm going to file for bankruptcy, which I did. And then, of course, in the book, I tell the story of what happened at the bankruptcy hearing with the bankruptcy judge. In which I talked the judge into letting me keep the name Twisted Sister, which I owned, the trademark.
Yeah, which was ballsy and brilliant at the same time.
Probably the single greatest speech I ever made in my life.
Yeah.
Off the cuff was that speech to the judge. But then again, to be fair, I talked my way out of 2 drug arrests as well. So it's not like I'm incapable of spinning a good tale and talking my way in and out of all kinds of situations. But I did talk my way out of 2 drug busts. So I had confidence I could do it. I just want to say, by the way, when Steve and I hooked up in 2010, 2 years prior to us hooking up, I convinced a documentary filmmaker to do a documentary on Twisted Sister, because he was interviewing me for another documentary. And so because I knew that I could do that, I was pretty confident when I told Steve the story, because the story has been the story of my life, and I've told it enough times with enough entertainment value that Steve would be compelled to at least go, wow, that's a great story. I mean, you don't know where it goes beyond that. But this whole process, if I look back at it, it's like playing the long game in life is really what this is about. This is really playing the long game in life, making long-term adjustments, even if the near term is so painful. Bankruptcy was painful. The day I walked out of bankruptcy court was one of the most emotionally difficult days of my life. However, because I don't drink and do drugs, I wasn't compelled to go muffle my emotional reaction with drugs and alcohol, which only create more problems. Right? So I was going to confront it head on with all the pain that goes with it, because that's the only way you get on with it. And as we talk about in the book, because Steve was able to pull this out of me as I was developing my motivational speaking engagement, which is, why would my story be compelling? What lessons are there in my story that people walk away going, wow, that is not just a rock and roll story. That's a life story. That's a business story. I don't think if my story was just a rock story, it would have interested Steve all that much. I think what Steve loved about it was it's a freaking business story. It's a business survival story, and it's a relationship, human being survival story. And that's kind of like, but you needed a guy like Steve to get it, because you needed someone with an enormous amount of empathy and intellectual capacity to grasp the whole thing, because it took a while. It took a while to develop.
Yeah. At one point you write in the book is that it would have been so easy at the point when you're managing the pool hall, working in the stereo store, after having experienced sort of this peak of success, to have felt sorry, for yourself, to actually imploded completely. And where did you find, the strength to continue? What was the motivation?
It's part of my, it's part of my being, because in the same way as saying, why didn't I become a drug addict when I was a drug addict? Why didn't I become a long-term drug addict? Because I just didn't, because I decided not to. It's like saying, why did you run a marathon? Because someone bet me $100. I never ran before. And I decided I'll take on that bet. Mm-hmm. And I trained to run a marathon, which was crazy. Then he said, run it under 4 hours. I never ran before.
Right.
And I ran the New York Marathon, So, I mean, look, I'm not a Superman, because there's a million stories of success in this world. I will say, however, that I am grateful that the success did not come when I was 20 years old, because the success hit when I was 34. And that's a huge difference. When you watch The Voice and you watch American Idol, you watch those shows, right, and the winners of those shows are basically lottery winners, and they tearfully stand in front of their following on the day they win the big record deal and $100,000, and they give this impassioned speech, which is, I'd like to thank my fans for staying with me for 15 weeks. And you basically want to throw up, and you basically, instead of feeling happy for them, I feel sad for them.
Yeah.
I don't feel happy, because I'm thinking, you have no
what's coming.
Freaking idea what is coming. So look, as Steve knows, when I was 11 and the Beatles were on television and I said, that's what I want to do, if somebody at that very moment put his hand on my shoulder and said, you will become a rock and roll star, you'll have a gold record, whatever the hell that means, but you'll have a gold record, that means you're a rock star. And I would go, really, when? Like in 3 years? And they go, no, 20 years and 6 months from now. I would have gone, screw that. And I probably would have stayed in school. So, and by the way, we're 30 years past that. We're 40 years past that. Right. So there's no way that if I'm looking at my 37 gold and platinum albums for the sake of bragging, but also to make a point, if I'm looking at them on my wall and I say to myself, wow, what was the price I paid for that? The price I paid for it was enormous. Absolutely enormous. Listen, probably the reason why I had atrial fibrillation was because of the stress. I mean, right. I can't say for sure, but I broke down a couple of times because the stress was absolutely incredible. But we talk about stress, we talk about character in the book, and character shows itself unexpectedly. You don't learn character. Character kind of, I believe, shows itself when duress shows up. So you don't know what you're capable of until the crap hits the fan. And when the crap hit the fan with Twisted on a number of occasions in my life, I responded because I responded. I didn't learn it in school.
But you also you talk about in the book, I think a very unique perspective, even for people that are younger. I mean, one is you stress over and over again, something that resonates with me so much is this idea about always remain curious, right? It's and
well,
something
that is
I've
a
been
direct
talking about.
That's a direct result of my parents.
Exactly.
I mean, my parents had me reading the New York Times cover to cover starting when I was about 10 years old.
Right.
And asking them questions, And then I got cocky, really cocky. I know, hard to believe. But I got really cocky and said to myself, you know what? I'm going to be so smart that I don't need a high school education or college education. I will be able to sit in front of anybody and talk about anything at any time. Because if I can sit in front of anybody and talk about anything at any time and start a conversation, I know I will have a leg up on a relationship with that person. So it doesn't matter if it's a nuclear proliferation treaty. It doesn't matter if it's, if it's starvation in India or Pakistan. It doesn't matter if it's the Cold War. It doesn't matter. I mean, I read The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich when I was 8 years old, I believe.
Sure.
So and then my parents were left wingers, and my first guitar teacher was the son of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. I mean, I didn't know who he was.
Right.
I didn't
different
know
last name as you write.
I didn't know the significance of that particular little tidbit. It's not a minor tidbit.
But something I think you're right about, and you're just talking about here, that resonates, and it's something that I've been writing about recently on LinkedIn as well. And interested, Steve, in your opinion, is you talk about character, you talk about values and things that stick with us throughout our lives. Is the role of parents. People often ask me, what's the basic root cause of bad salesmanship? And I'll say bad parenting. Because, people have been taught how to be a human being, how to connect, how to have a conversation, as JJ talked about, have a conversation with anybody in the world. One of the things my parents are really good about is putting us out with their friends. So we learned how to have conversations and be interested in people where there's huge status mismatch between us, right? We were kids, they were adults. And I think that's something that really holds you in good place as you go throughout life and your career.
Yeah, but here's the thing that I think we need to make really clear for people. It's one thing to kind of understand where your own proclivities come from, where your strengths and weaknesses come from. It came from my parents, my kids, my upbringing, whatever. You asked JJ, how did you learn that tenacity? It's just the way I'm built. Yeah, that's true. And it doesn't really do any good for the rest of us. So if you say, well, I'm tenacious because I'm just tenacious. Well, what if I'm not? How do I become tenacious, right? If that's an important quality. So I think this is a really important distinction to make. The process for the book was really, let's look at your story, JJ, and see if we can extract from that the principles that other people can use in their story, whatever it is. Mm-hmm. Because even though, most of us, we have our natural tendencies, that doesn't mean that we're slaves to them. If we get conscious and intentional, I could be tenacious and understanding what that is and how important that is, I could develop the ability to be even more so. And it's like for me, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. I'm an optimist. Mm-hmm. I'm a born optimist. It's part of my nature. And I'm still an optimist. When I look around the world today and see the kind of unbelievable dire situation that we're in, I'm still an optimist, but I have to work harder at it nowadays. Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, so I have a natural inclination, but I could still lose that if I don't work at it. And I think that's true for all of us in some way. So these principles that we illuminate in this book, that twisted method, is derived from JJ's experience, but it's applicable in any experience and in any business and in any walk of life, actually.
Well, I think the key point you bring up, because, I've just, in 3 weeks, my third book is being published. And it's the same thing that I emphasize, is there's 4 pillars that enable you to be successful in a sales role if you're intentional about applying them and using them. And it is all about intentionality and being purposeful in terms of what is the experience you're trying to create for the people that you're dealing with.
I have to say, Steve, I take it for granted, and you're 100% right. I do, because yes, I am tenacious by design, but the whole point of the book is to tell you how to recognize it within yourself. If you don't even recognize that you have it, you may not. Someone has to hold it up in front of you. And by the way, none of the principles in the book were held up in front of me as like, you are these things. It wasn't until years later that I looked back at it. And the tools that we give you in the book to observe, experience what happens to you in life are the tools that I used that eventually got me where I wanted to go. But I had no idea I was doing them at the time I was doing them.
Sure.
None whatsoever.
Rarely are, right?
Like you just experience stuff. And the day I walked into the scene where the drummer, the singer had the loaded gun aimed at the drummer's chest and was going to kill him. I'm 22 years old. I'm only processing what I'm about to watch, which is a murder. Mm. I'm not intellectualizing it going, well, John, there's a lesson to be learned here, which is going to be in a book in 40 years. And let's make a note of that. It was like, oh my God, but what that did was the catalyst of that was that, and this is, and Steve, you're really 100% right. So what was my reaction to that? My reaction to that, Maureen leaving me and the band breaking up all in the same 2-week period of time, which traumatized the hell out of me, was I started keeping a diary. And the diary became a tool for me surviving future problems. Because as I wrote down my mental state and my reaction to the problems that I was being confronted with over time, every time things eventually worked itself out, they reinforced my ability to work themselves out. Right. And I became confident that I could solve the problem because I became confident that I could solve the problem only because I solved the problem. Whether how I solved it was irrelevant. The fact was I solved it. All you need is the confidence of doing it. So when we were coming up with the book and the decision was, well, what kind of book is it? Is it a memoir? Is it a business book? Is it a memoir? Is it a business book? And this was a question that constantly was coming up as we were developing the book. I felt like that last scene in the movie Chinatown. She's my mother. She's my sister. She's my mother and my sister. Like, is it a business book? Is it? And I said, well, why can't it be both? Because isn't every profile of a businessman really a memoir and a business book? Because it's how they grew up and experienced life is ultimately how they did business. So we coined a phrase for marketing purposes, which was bizwar. The idea of the twisted method was a direct result of the speaking engagements, because when you watch great speakers, and the first speaker I saw was Steve, and I was blown away. It was like watching Jimi Hendrix play guitar for me. It really was that important to my understanding about if that is a world that I'm going to be in, that's the level of technique and quality you have to be. All these guys, all of them, to Tony Robbins, which everybody knows, they all have a, quote, presentational gimmick, a shtick of sort. For lack of better phrasing and without being cynical, your performers is what you are. Preachers are performers. Sure. Politicians are performers. What is your shtick? What is your story? So I was floundering around with Steve. Steve had me on several of Extreme Leadership conferences, and then I started booking my own. And I would be not floundering around. My story was my story, but I wanted a context. I wanted to be able to compact it all into a presentation. The idea of the twisted method came about because of one of the things I teach about walking. Exercise is really great for you, and I've done some of the greatest decisions in my life have been made taking long walks. Right. I love taking long walks. It really helps me think. In fact, I just saw an incredible story in CNN. Dr. Sanjay Gupta talked about how walking is more beneficial to preventing Alzheimer's and dementia than running. Seriously. Because they found that running, although it's great for your heart and your lungs, increases the dopamine, which is the exact thing that can block your ability for your mind to protect itself and to become a prophylactic protective against possible dementia. And they have found that walking is actually the best exercise you can do. So in the process of walking one day, the twisted method, I said to myself, how can I make it easy that anybody can understand it? You have to understand, Twisted Sister fans, we're not Mensa members. It's like, how can you digest it and get it down to something? And with Steve, here's the thing. You go to these sessions where Steve does his thing, where you see a lot of these speakers, and everyone starts pulling out PowerPoints, and you can see the eyeballs roll and the eyes glazing. Oh, no, another freaking, oh, God. So how do you make it simple? And the twisted method became the pathway. Then you had to come up with the reasons why each letter mattered. And each letter did matter. As I was peeling it out in my head, I went, wow, I can tell stories related to each one of these that absolutely explain why Twisted Sisters succeeded. And that was a byproduct of the fact that Steve and I had been hammering and hammering and hammering and hammering over time.
So Andy, for your listeners, it's interesting to hear the story of kind of the process of the book, but this is what I would encourage people to do. And I've done this with my clients, and I've done it in workshops and that kind of a thing. But it works something like this. You have your own experience. You have your own story, which is, of course, otherwise known as your life. So the process is to look back over the events of your life. And particularly the things that happened, the things that you experienced that stand out as being important for some reason. You may not know the reason, but the fact that you remember them means that they're important, right? And then, so capture those. Now, if you kept the diary like JJ did, that makes it a lot easier. But otherwise, just go back and do like a little timeline from the, 0 to 5 years old, 5 to 10 years old, 10 to 15, et cetera. And then look at those, think about those stories, recall those stories, and then ask yourself, what did I learn from those? What did I learn? And see what principles come out of it. And then that clarity then allows you to say to yourself, oh, this is what works for me. Now, am I being intentional about it in my life going forward? And is there something here that other people can benefit from? So what we did, that's exactly what we did with this book. We just started, I sat him down in his kitchen in New York, turned on the recorder and said, start at day one. And he told me the whole story. And then we transcribed everything. And then the question is, what are the lessons from this? Which is when the twisted method arose. And then we went back and said, okay, which of these stories
applies
serves
to
to illustrate
those
principles?
Right.
And that ended up becoming the structure of the book.
Yeah, I mean, several things in there you're talking about is, and I think the one that comes through in the book that's so important and it aligns with the message that I'm giving out all the time is that your goal, especially in the sales world, is oftentimes your personal goal is at odds, I think, with what oftentimes management wants you to do. And so increasingly in the sales world, it's about compliance to a process, right? We've got this process. We need you to comply to that process. Instead, as I advocate in the book, is grabbing autonomy and learning how to become the best version of yourself, right? Finding a way to work based on what you've learned through your career, through your experiences, is going to make you the best possible version of you. And there's a sort of inherent conflict, oftentimes, certainly in the sales world, about that. And as individuals, and I think as JJ personifies in the book, and you guys worked in the book, is, excuse me, no one cares as much about your success as you do, right? No one cares about you the same way that you do. So it's really up to you to seize the reins and be resilient and tenacious and have a mentor or multiple mentors, as JJ you talk about in the book, Steve being the latest among them. To, as I said, is put your focus on what do I have to do, what do I have to try, what do I have to learn to become this best version of me?
Right, exactly.
And since we specialize in the entrepreneurial world, although these practices could work anywhere, but I had to then, in my mind, ask myself this question: why does one become an entrepreneur? Doesn't matter what they do. Why do you do it? And I deduced, this is my own, that you become an entrepreneur for one of two reasons. Either you've come up with an idea that nobody in the world knows exists, and you are the only one that somehow possesses it, and you are willing to risk everything that you own in your life to get the world to know it, or you see something that needs to be updated or refined or presented in a new way that the world has not seen, and you're ready to give up and risk everything in the world to do it. In the case of Twisted Sister, well, there was a million rock bands that existed before Twisted Sister. But Twisted Sister was created specifically to correct the mistakes of the New York Dolls. I mean, when I thought about this, I went, wow, this is perfect for exactly what I'm talking about. I went to see the Dolls. I went, man, they look great, and they're the worst band I've ever seen in my life, I've ever heard. And if you come up with a band that looked that good and actually could play, you may have a winning combination. That was the whole catalyst behind Twisted Sister. Because the day I saw the Dolls, I was asked my opinion by a record executive. I walked out of the show. I assume I'm 20 years old. A guy like in his late 30s in a suit stopped me on the staircase at the Mercer Art Center and said, "Did you just see the show?" And I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "What'd you think?" So I'm assuming he wanted my opinion. And I went, "Amazing looking band. They suck." I said, "If they ever learn how to play, you're going to have yourself a hit band on your hand." And
Didn't they stick around for a long time?
Yeah. Listen, I mean, they stuck around.
Who was the lead singer, the guy?
Yeah, David Johansen. The Dolls lasted 2 years, and what I say about the Dolls is no secret. David Johansen has said it about the Dolls, so I don't have to care about it. But the point is, it was sacrificing everything you had to bring a better idea out. But all these principles could be used for for anything. Listen, as I say in the book, Tommy James from Tommy James and the Shondells gave me the first piece of advice I ever asked for in the music business. As a matter of fact, here I am, a 24-year-old kid playing in a band and opening for Tommy James and the Shondells, who were a big deal.
Yeah, well, it's sort of interesting to think of the a combination of Twisted Sister and Tommy James and the Shondells. I think we're alone now.
Yeah, but I'll get you even weirder. I mean, we opened for Little Anthony and the Imperials. We opened for the Coasters, and we opened for a chimpanzee named Mr. Jiggs, who did better than us, who went over better than us. So I mean, forget about the examples. But but the point was with Tommy James, here we were playing a corner bar in Long Island to 300 people, which to us that time was the most people we'd played to. 300 people. That was a great packed night. I'm happy. Right. Tommy James is obviously on the downside of his career, having peaked in the 60s, and now he's stuck playing bars on Long Island for 300 people. And there was Dee had just joined the band, so it was maybe like a month into Dee being in the band, and we did our show and we finished, and I'm walking downstairs. I remember this so clearly, and Tommy James is walking by me, and I look at him and I went, "Hey man, what a pleasure to meet you." You know, I didn't say, "God, it's got to suck for you that you're playing for 300 drunk people at like a little corner bar," but I just said, "Can you give me some advice?" And he looked at me and he went, "Yeah, I'll give you some advice." He said, "You're going to meet the same people on the way up as you do on the way down, so treat everybody the same way." That was all he said. He didn't say it in a cynical way or condescending way or anything like that. But what he said to me that day, I happen to believe in 100%. It was nice to hear somebody successful who had the same feeling, because a lot of problems in the music industry and the entertainment industry is you get screwed, you screw the next generation over, because it's like beating your kid. You get beaten, you beat your kid because you got beaten up. That happens over and over and over again in the music business. And Tommy James was just a really cool guy. And then there were other mentors along the way. And when we get to the T for trust in the book, I tell a story about Ronnie Altman, which is a great story. But you have to develop a reputation, a good reputation in the book. And where Steve and I really kind of hit it off was, I think Steve was stunned at the, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think you were stunned at the morality of the business that we ran, Steve, as opposed to like whatever sex, drugs, rock and roll, like threats and all the shit that goes with it. There was a very strong moral base.
Yeah, it didn't really fit any of my preconceived notions about what bad boy rockers are supposed to be. Yeah, and that, like I said earlier, that's the thing that hooked me in the very beginning was no place for drugs and alcohol in this business.
Yeah, so you ran it like a business.
Yeah,
right?
But then as we got deeper into it, just the and you see this when you hang out with JJ, you see it over and over again. There is a kindness and a friendliness there that endears him to people. Because it's genuine, and it comes back to curiosity. He loves hearing people's stories, and he's more than willing to share his own, and with anybody, and it's a lovely thing to see, and it's something that that I've believed in as a business person and as a leadership guy for 30 years. It's what I try to get people to understand. It's kindness and love and relationship and connection that forms the basis for any business. But to see it played out in the business of rock and roll, because of the contrast with the stereotype, is really it's compelling as hell. It really is.
It is. Well, it's a very excellent book. I urge people to pick it up and read it.
As do we.
I'm sure you do. So,
hey, by the way, I'm just I noticed. The other day, JJ, that Dee tweeted about the book. Did you see that?
Oh, of course I did. It got tons and tons. Of course, Dee tweeted this. He said he tweeted the comment that we wrote, which was he is narcissistic, self-absorbed, selfish motherfucker, but he's honest, he's truthful, he's committed, and he does what he says he's going to do. So I gave you the two sides of Dee Snider in equal measure. So Dee goes, just read JJ's book. It was great. And he runs the comment. And someone wrote, only somebody who's a narcissistic, self-absorbed, egotistic motherfucker would use that quote to describe his favorite quote in the book, which is what I kind of loved as a... And then Dee texted me on the side. He goes, man, that was a really great book. But the beauty of being able to write that was, and as we illustrate in the book, is we confronted our demons together. And we said these things. This wasn't like a revelation and a new revelation to him.
No, you talk about your reconciliation that you had after a long period of estrangement, and you leveled with each other. So
and I was happy to write it because I said exactly what it is. But so many people wrote back, typical lead singer. Yeah, of course, you know.
But it was gratifying as the co-author on the book. It was gratifying to see that the guys who are closest to this in a personal way really enjoyed the read as well. So that was
because that's a tough thing to do, is write a book about your bandmates and then have them like the book, because everyone's expecting the gotchas. You know, where's the gotchas? Look, was every dirty story could possibly be the book? No, and it wasn't the point. That was not the point of the book. The point of the book really was to be a book, a business advice book. And the more we did it, the more I felt positive that the choice of getting Steve to do it with me was the absolute right choice. This is the face. We didn't talk about the music. And, we're a rock band, but we really didn't. You read these other books, they're more music-oriented. This was not. This was an explanation of the other side of...
Yeah, I said, good read. So if, JJ, if people want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Well, I have a direct email that I do answer, which is Ask JJ, which is JAYJAY, Ask JJTS, as in Twisted Sister, just the two letters, AskJJTS@gmail, and they can email me right away. If they want to hire me for speaking engagements, they can do it through that. They can contact me there. I'm at JJ French on Twitter. I'm on Facebook, Twisted Sisters on Facebook, JJ French is on Facebook, JJFrench.com, JAYJAY.com. Also, I have a podcast, The JJ French Connection, which new episodes every Tuesday. It's on Apple, it's on Spotify, it's on Podcast One. It's called The JJ French Connection Beyond the Music, where I have authors, writers, musicians, and doctors.
Very cool. Yeah, you got medical month you're talking about.
Well, we're on that age where my motto is sex, prescription drugs, and rock and roll.
Right,
that's our motto.
That's changed. And Steve, if people want to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yes, SteveFarber.com is the best place to go. I'm also on all the social media haunts. But at SteveFarber.com, you can subscribe to the daily audio message, which I've been getting tremendous feedback on. Tremendous feedback. So, and if you don't like it, you can always unsubscribe. But give it a try.
Yeah, no, I'm on your list. I get it. So, all right, gentlemen, thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Andy.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, friends, that's it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking time to listen. As always, I'm so grateful for your support of the show. And I want to thank my guests, JJ French and Steve Farber, for sharing their insights with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We thank you for your help with that. And as always, thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.